Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Carmines Arena, a cultural gourmet of information, if you will, a feast for your mind and soul. And now, without further delay, the man, the myth, the maestro, Carmine Arena.
Hello, and thank you for joining me in Carmines Arena, site of contest and conflict, venue for and of resolution. Resolution in terms of focus, remedy, and commitment, both yours and mine, to the preservation of Western civilization, in fact, to the propagation of its many, many glories. This episode marks the 40th time that I've been with you, which means that I will have spent some 20 hours lecturing. That constitutes quite a seminar, does it not? I am generally introduced as man, myth, and maestro, and I have been asked on any number of occasions to elaborate on that constellation. For it was not necessarily my description, not at all. It was that of my earlier producers, and their knowing my story came upon this constellation, and I'll try to explain it, to justify it, and to validate it. The man part, I guess you get. Here I am, yours truly, hopefully not only man, but a pretty face. Myth I will be discussing at length this half hour. And maestro, I guess, is rather obvious, for since childhood I have been at this passion called music. A quite jealous mistress she is, but when you accord her her due, she can be very, very generous. So music has always informed me all my life. And apart from its sound, I have studied silently, chipping away at its meaning and analyzing those many specks on a score that later, hopefully, I bring to life in sound which, more than any other art in this regard, shapes the invisible. Now, I say this apart from the kind of purported music that purports to entertain, that is amped to decibel levels that are deafening. And aside from my tastes, which might be different from many of yours, I nonetheless want to justify what I'm saying by mentioning, rather sadly, that hundreds of thousands of our youth today are suffering a diminution of their hearing ability, thanks to the mechanisms and gizmos they clamp on to their ears, fasten there, and raise to a hellish decibel level, very often quite painful. This affects the 15,000 hair cells in the inner ear and either ear, 15,000 of them, we can count them, which are diminished and irrevocably lost. Apart from that, it was interesting reading recently that in St. Petersburg, Russia, the great Hermitage Museum, with its thick walls, and I mention this for a purpose because outside in that vast square are very often held rock concerts, and the poor, desperate curators have had to ask the authorities to intervene in order to issue some kind of ordinance to get them to use a decibel level that won't go beyond a certain point, for they have found that it is undermining the art behind those thick walls, and they've constantly at restoring or mending. Can you imagine from the noise alone? Now, I have attended any number of institutions of higher learning, and I've been granted and honored by scholarships which I have fulfilled. I mention this because none of that makes any difference at all if it would not that I was anxious always to look behind factoids and facts and mere knowledge and mere meaning, but to get to significance and possibly, quite possibly, to get to, with the help of music informing me, to wisdom. Now, once I thought that I had a certain degree of wisdom in tow, I found that my vocation was teaching. Whether I was at the piano or gabbing the way I am now, I am constrained to share what I think I know. And so, nonetheless, with all of this, like John Fowles, whom I now quote, the novelist, the famous novelist John Fowles, who said, "I continue teaching because it sharpens my sense of futility." How true that is. And those of us who teach understand precisely what it is that I say here. However, if it is our vocation, if it is our compulsion, call it generosity if you will, we continue to defy that futility. And so, back in the 1980s, I began to feel, despite all of this, quite dissatisfied. I became increasingly restive. I seemed to have intuited that there was something more that I was missing. What was it? I couldn't put my finger on it. And yet, when I finally had my epiphany, thank goodness, I realized that I had more than a finger on it. I had my 10 fingers on it. It was my keyboard once again. Once again, it was music that was to inform me. Now, one of the glories of Western civilization is the invention of the piano, which has become a necessity, so much so that is the mother of necessity for we musicians, us musicians. Now, it is omnipresent. You find it all over the world, and yet I've asked musicians themselves, who invented this wonderful, marvelous contraption? And they're totally mystified. They know who invented the telephone, the radio, the sewing machine, the cotton gin, but this dazzling invention, inexhaustible and beloved by most composers, they don't know who it was. There was a specific person. His name was Bartolomeo Cristofori, and he was born in Padua, Italy. Padua, that scene of The Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare, although it has nothing to do with that. He later on moved to Florence, where he became the curator of musical instruments for the Grand Duke Fernando de' Medici. Now, he created this model because the harpsichord from which the piano comes, its mother is the harpsichord, and like all mothers, it still shapes the piano as it shapes us. And I say this with understanding that in 1711, this invention, before that, there was no way at the keyboard to get a loud and a soft sound, save if you were playing the organ. The harpsichord was of one level, and that was it. Now, along came the pianoforte, which means soft and loud, and that's precisely what was achieved. So, this invention became a necessity, rather than necessity being the mother of invention. And what can I tell you about my wonderful instrument, except that it's grandly large, you know that, and it is quite expensive. And it's begun since time immemorial to symbolize high living standards. And as a musical instrument, it has been found in households, in classrooms, in entertainment centers, and arenas all over the world. And it's also been found in palaces, boudoirs, bistros, bars, prisons, and yes, even bordellos. And talk about being omnipresent. It was the child and the progenitor of the Industrial Revolution, which fed and grew on mass production directly related to piano manufacture. In fact, in 19th century America, there were more pianos to be found than bathtubs. Can you imagine that? Its extraordinary range of pitches and dynamics makes it an incomparable instrument. And it is a unsurpassed mechanism for delivering up, because of its resonators, the marvels of piano sound. It increased the base of, expanded the base of music appreciation, inasmuch as the piano brought opera and symphony into the home and spawned an age of solo, vocal, and chamber music, and triumphed, as it still does, as an equal concerto partner with the orchestra. It is, in short, a titan amongst instruments, 100 instruments in one, a nexus of science and art, and an amalgam of form, content, and meaning. It is complex, it is visionary, and it is elegant. And it is, with its horizontal harp, under 20 tons of pressure. 20 tons. Pianos enjoy that kind of tension. It is the same amount that is required of thrust, 20 tons of thrust, in order to get a jet liner into the air. And how well we know, those of us who know how to listen, how many times pianos have lifted us higher than any jet liner. Now, I was practicing back then in my restive days of 1980, when, in the 1980s, let me make that clear, when, as I was expecting a delivery from G. Schirmer's, the publishers, of a number of scores, amongst which was the 15 Eroica Variations for piano by Beethoven. Beethoven used this theme finally in his monumental Third Symphony, but he had been playing with one of those themes for a long time. And one of them was used for The Creatures of Prometheus, a ballet. And Prometheus was a titan who dared to steal fire from the heavens and bring it to earth and give it to mankind. Zeus, irritated, was to punish him by pinioning him to a rock for eternity, where a vulture or an eagle continued to devour each day his liver, and each night it was regenerated so that the torment would be continuous. Now, there I was practicing, as per usual, as I was saying, and with a tape recorder, one of those great big wheel-to-wheel things. The bell rang. That was my delivery. I ran to the front door, and there it was, UPS, and there were my scores. And I saw the time was noon, and I figured I'd better stop for lunch first. Did all of that, and then got into the studio again to continue practicing. Well, what happens? I'm irritated instantly because I neglected to turn off my tape. There it was, still spinning away, and I had to rewind the whole darn thing. And I was so irritated that I decided to hear what I had done rather than to play. It's always good to do this because when you listen to yourself without playing, you listen with critical ears, and appreciation is nothing without judgment. And so there I am listening, and there it came to the point where the doorbell rang, and I was about to turn it off when suddenly, bang! Bang! There was a voice that I recognized, but I couldn't pinpoint. I could not, for the life of me, tell you who it was who was speaking. Was this some kind of prank? What was it? Well, it turns out, as I'm listening, that I am being introduced to my own piano. The voice is telling me that it has called itself, my piano, by the wonderful name Pedals. And why? Because pedals are the soul of the piano and continue to have all of those marvelous sounds resonate just like an orchestra, and that it is a lifetime that is necessary to learn to use those pedals with refinement. It is not just up, down, up, down, up, down. Well, you can imagine I recognized the voice, and now it had a name, and I realized why it was that I recognized it. It wasn't sounding like a piano, and yet it was my piano. Very difficult to explain. Well, Pedals went on to tell me that Martello, the first piano that Cristofori brought into this world, thanks to the harpsichord, its mother, he was the midwife, as it were, the obstetrician. And the harpsichord had called this instrument martello, which means hammers, for unlike the harpsichord, which has a key depressed and a jack brings up plectra or picks to pluck at the string, this now has hammers that hammer away either fiercely or lightly and getting piano and forte. Well, as restless, as restive, and as dissatisfied as I had been, I am told now that Martello, the first piano, feels the same way. Dissatisfied with man's insight and dissatisfied with the way Western civilization was being, ignored. And so he summoned all of pianodom together and instructed Pedals to speak to me and to command me to write an autobiographical fable. An autobifab, Pedals calls it. I was to be pianodom's amanuensis, its stenographer, and transcribe our impending conversations and arguments, and use my own biography, and also the structure, get this, the structure of the work was to be the 15 variations on a theme from the Eroica by Beethoven. Talk about coincidence. Now, when I asked, how in heaven's name do pianos, which are stationary, meet? He said, well, we all meet on pianosa. I said, what? Pianosa. He said, you have it in your library, your scholarly 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, known as the scholarly edition. I quickly ran, looked up pianosa, and there it was, geographically pinpointed off the coast of Italy in the Tyrrhenian Sea, and there it was, geographically pinpointed, and its geology was even given, stratum by stratum. And so, when I asked, how is this done? He said, my piano, as all pianos, are beyond gender. He is what one uses for speech, or she. And he can be an alpha male or a gentle lady. It depends upon how one plays it. Now, the thing is, I'm told that not using the geographic, or I should say the astronomical calendar, the pianos use an acoustical one. And then they are able to know exactly when the octave of Florentine falls. And it is on the octave of Florentine or Florentine that they all gather. They get there, I am told, and I have to take Pedal's word for it, by a series of irrational keys vibrating through 11 dimensions, best understood by superstring theorists. And those of you who have been keeping up with the string theory can follow this even better than I was able to then. 11 dimensions. And there they discuss their maker. We, people, us, men, mankind. They discuss us as we discuss our maker, only we do it theologically, they do it anthropologically, I suppose. They are commanded now to share their vast knowledge, which is an enormous apperceptive mass that goes back to the first keyboards ever made. For these things are so marvelous that for one reason or another, beyond our ken and beyond our reason, they've always spoken to one another. And they share with us a parallel universe. Now, those skeptics out there want to be told what Pedals wishes to convey. And that is that myth and fable are no more unreal than all of us who relate them. And that that culture ultimately enshrines. Yes, indeed. And because of their enormous omnipresence and omniscience, they have developed a unified field theory of man's experience and have plumbed the very DNA of our reality. This work, some 600 some odd pages, is real, and it's found cataloged in the Library of Congress. It is called Pedals, Notes from a Piano, 1980s. Now, I want, in fact, Pedals invites me to do this, to read to you what Shakespeare wrote about one of the ancestors of the piano, a harpsichord. And Shakespeare is admiring of a lady who is playing it. I should like you to listen carefully to these 14 lines. How oft when thou my music placed upon that blessed wood whose motion sounds, with thy sweet fingers, when thou gently swayest, the witty concord that my ear confounds. Do I envy those jacks that nimble leap to kiss the tender inward of thy hand, whilst my poor lips would should that harvest reap, at the wood's boldness by thee blushing stand, and situation with those dancing chips, or whom thy fingers walk with gentle gait, making dead wood more blessed than living lips. Since saucy jacks so happy are in this, give them thy fingers, me thy lips to kiss. And so love is born again, once again, as it will be continued at the keyboard. Yes, indeed, Shakespeare, as with all great artists, have continued to animate the inanimate. And myth is no less real than a rhinoceros, a platypus, or a giraffe. Could you have fathomed a giraffe? Could you have fathomed one had you not seen it in a picture? Moving and breathing and living and being so much a giraffe. I invite you to stick your neck out beyond reason and what you generally call reality. And so, that is the message. And that was my epiphany. And I will be continuing to quote Pedals, who again reminds us that we're spinning on our little planet on our own axis as it courses an orbit about the sun. What could be more mysterious than that? Yes, cross my heart, Pedal says, and hope to vie. Cross my heart and hope to vie. Vie against the misperceptions that doubt brings to our senses, our all too common senses, where we lose so much where reason ends and where reason generally reduces everything to absurdity. Myth and fable are sonar that plumb and fathom the depths of our soul as miracles search the heavens to find our Maker and to find God. Yes, indeed, wisdom is what I always sought, and wisdom's threads make up a wonderful weave. Between its warp and woof lie wit, whimsy, Pedals, and yours truly. Till next time, please keep the faith. If you have any comments or other remarks, and that I perhaps could even read on some of these broadcasts, please do not hesitate to write to me, Carmine Arena, P.O. Box 1029, Larchmont, New York 10538.